over to Wajahat now for the next session. Wajahat.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. It's almost 2 p.m. here in Alexandria, Virginia. I hope everyone is as safe as they can be during this very unique time and crisis that we're all enduring together. My guest, I guess you can call him, even though we will just simply be having a conversation, is Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. He's an American Muslim scholar, co-founder of the Zaytuna College that you all know and love. He is also an advisor to the Center for Islamic Studies at the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley, California. He, in addition, serves as vice president for the Global Center for Guidance and Renewal, which was founded and is currently presided over by Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya. You have heard his speeches, you have read his texts. He has been consistently listed in the top 50 of the 500 most influential Muslims for a long time now. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. Thank you, Shaykh, for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We will talk for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and then I'm sure most of the people listening have many questions, and so I will allow you your time to ask the Shaykh your questions. But for our conversation, I just wanted to see if you, from an Islamic perspective, as a Shaykh, as a man who has traveled the world, studied, mashallah, under so many leaders, both here and abroad, can give us an Islamic perspective as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us with a pandemic such as this. Because people are trying to rationalize why a loving and merciful God would allow so many who are immunocompromised, Black, poor, those with cancer, to suffer and to die from a virus that right now has no vaccine. What is the Islamic perspective to truly understand this pandemic?
Yeah, that's a huge...
I'm not asking, I mean, of course, I'm not asking you to be like the,
solve the riddles of the universe.
I mean, only in 20 minutes. Only in 20 minutes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Alhamdulillah. First of all, thank you for having me on. Muhammad Meles has been a friend for a long time. He's been asking me to do something with Concordia for a while. He was an early supporter of Zaytuna College, so I appreciate that. And Mudassar also. And Wajahat for agreeing to interview. Or at least have a discussion. The topic of human suffering, I mean, obviously is a huge topic in religion from the Islamic tradition. And we don't have a monolithic tradition. We have people that wrote books on theodicy or attempting to explain the ways of God to human beings. So, but there's a lot of different views on this, but if you just go back to the Quran makes it very clear in several verses that the world is a tribulation. One of our greatest scholars in the spiritual tradition, who's known as Imam al-Junayd al-Baghdadi, and he's an agreed upon Imam. He was an outward scholar, but he was also a master of the inward sciences. Ibn Taymiyyah praises him, so everybody accepts him. He said that he took as a foundational principle something that once he took it as his principle, nothing bothered him from the world. And he said that principle was that this place is an abode of tribulation, of difficult ham, which could be stress or depression or concern or woe. He said, Daru hammin wa ghammin wa bala'in wa fitna, and strife and temptation and tribulation. Fitna is one of those words in the Quran that has a lot of different meanings. So he said that's the nature of the abode, and it is designed to come to me with everything that I dislike. And he said, so if it comes to me with what I like, then it's fadl, it's grace and it's bounty, and I should be grateful. But it's not the nature of the abode. Once you understand that, I mean, the Buddhists get this, the world is suffering. That's the first noble truth that Buddha taught. This is not different from the Islamic tradition. We understand that the world is a tribulation. And the tribulation can become suffering from surfeit, from having too much, or suffering from having too little. And both of them are tribulations. One of the verses in the Quran, we made some of you a tribulation for others. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, we made the rich a tribulation, that it means we made the rich a tribulation for the poor. We made the poor a tribulation for the rich. We made the educated a tribulation for the uneducated, and the uneducated a tribulation for the educated. We made the Muslim a tribulation for the non-Muslim, and the non-Muslim a tribulation for the Muslim. This is the world. And I think once you accept that, you can kind of relax. But I think everybody wants this to be paradise. And so when things fall apart, which they inevitably will, including our own bodies, then people suddenly lose faith. I don't know. It seems to me that they probably had faith in the wrong things in the first place. And that's why they're now, if you ask, why are some people suffering than others? This is called the mystery of iniquity in the Christian tradition. We can't determine why the circumstances of the world are as they are, but we do know that the sins of fathers are definitely visited upon their children. Things that people did 100 years ago are affecting us today. And so that's one of the reasons why we as a generation should be a generation that attempts as much as possible to break those kind of patterns that peoples of the past fall into. But you can't do that collectively. You do that individually. And if you have a critical mass of people, then it'll have a collective impact. But the trials and tribulation of the world will continue. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is one of the best times to be alive. I actually have a book here in my life. I wasn't planning on this, but this is worth reading. You know, it's called Factfulness, 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. You know, it's written by a physician from the UN who worked in some of the worst areas. And he just shows how, you know, despite the fact that there are a lot of tribulations in many places and people are suffering and difficult, in a lot of places, the world's better than it's ever been. And one of the problems with human beings is that we are an ungrateful species. We whine and we complain constantly. And the Quran is very clear about whining and complaining. If you do it, God says he'll give you more to whine and complain about. But if you're grateful, he'll give you more things to be grateful for.
And so, hello, assalamu alaikum. We're just going to ask you to mute that if you don't mind. I'm going to continue with Shaykh Hamza real quick. You know, Shaykh Hamza, I appreciate that perspective on it, but there are some who are listening who say, despite what you've said, I'm still a human being. I have anxiety. I have lost my job. I can't pay my rent. I'm stuck at home. My child or my father or my grandfather might be immunocompromised. And everything that you said, I agree. I should be grateful. I understand I should be humble. I understand that every generation has had a tribulation. 100 years ago, 1918, the influenza that was called Spanish influenza, but was actually emerged from the United States, that generation went through this. But tell me, you know, as you know, human to human, man to man, father to father, how can I endure this? Because I know how I'm supposed to be, but I am a human being with anxieties and fears. How should I endure this moment as a Muslim?
Look, I go back to the Quran. I actually believe in the Quran. I don't know. I think a lot of Muslims have lost a relationship with the Quran. For me, the Quran is very clear. Human beings are created in anxiety. Like we enter into the world as children. When we first come out of the womb of the mother, we're in a complete state of anxiety. And then the Quran says, if harm afflicts them, they panic. And if good afflicts them, they withhold. Illa al-musallin, except for people of prayer. And then it goes on to list the qualities that those people have. So there's another verse in the Quran that says, whenever a calamity afflicts, you know, that people that recognize it, they say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And this is something, I think modern people have really lost this quality, because pre-modern peoples, I mean, I've spent a good part of my life in works that were written several hundred years ago, and the difference in faith and how people responded. Muslims have been through hell in the past. I mean, we have been through Holocaust, and yet people kept their faith. Now people seem to lose their faith very easily, and just one wonders, was that faith in the first place, or how strong was it? Because the Quran says there are people who worship God just on the edge. When things are going well, they're with God. And then when things go badly, they're not with God. All you have to do is study the seerah of the Prophet. Who had a more difficult life than the best of creation? I mean, he lost all of his family. He was persecuted. He watched his own people being tortured in front of him. Who had a more difficult life? I think people need to reconnect with the Quran and with the seerah. And yeah, we're human. That's true. The Ibrahim, when the guest wouldn't eat his food, it says, he felt fear, because in that tradition, the desert people, if you don't eat their food, it means you intend harm for them. So he thought the angels maybe were going to harm him. So he had natural fear. Anxiety is natural. People need to do dhikr. The Prophet, if he ever became anxious about anything or troubled, he would go to prayer. Like, seek help and succor in prayer and in patience. These are real things, and they actually work if people actually try them. One of the things about modern people, I lived with Bedouin people. Bedouin people have nothing. There's no 911 to call if somebody has a heart attack or if somebody's really sick. But I found that those people had such incredible faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I didn't see depression amongst them. I just saw people that were really in a state of submission to Allah. This religion is called Islam. I mean, it means that you're in a state of submission to Allah. وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ. If you trust it, that's said right before tribulation. If you trust in God, God will guide your heart. In the commentaries, they say, guide your heart to accepting the tribulations that he sent. And then pain and suffering. I mean, I was in an area where 1 out of every 4 children died. And I saw little children that got sick and died. Again, we're very spoiled, especially here in the United States. Even poor people in the United States, the things that we have in this country are just overwhelming, and England too, which doesn't, I'm not belittling human suffering at all, but I'm also really arguing for people to put things into a perspective. For those of us who live with chronic pain is a really fascinating thing, like to be constantly in pain in your body. And for those of us who know that, you can either just, be miserable all the time, or say, what does this mean? One of the great scholars of Turkey said that sometimes out of God's love for his servants, he gives them chronic pain so that they kind of are looking forward to getting out of the world.
But can I say this? The perspective that you've given, especially by tying it to the life of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, allows those who believe and those of us who are believers to say,
You'll be able to send me a message on WhatsApp.
Can someone mute that? Shaykh Hamza. That's how I'm supposed to be. But what you said also doesn't apply to many Americans who work 2 jobs right now just to stay afloat. Black and brown communities, as you know, I don't know if those who are paying attention to what's happening in the United States of America, but this virus has really affected Black and brown populations where there's been a surge, also the poor. And as such, there are men and women of faith in those communities, not just Muslims, but Christians. People have done everything right. And yet they're the ones who are getting hammered. So if you talk to them, they're like, this is not me whining. This is not me complaining. This is not me about being, coddled. This is me being a victim of inequities in this system. And the answer to, to my tribulation right now, to pray harder, to pray more, is not going to cut it. And so for us,
yeah, go ahead.
No. So first, I had to follow up to that. But how would you respond to that? Meaning, I pray, but it's not enough.
The Quran clearly says, seek refuge in prayer. So either you believe the book or not. If about other faiths and other people and what they're going through, I don't know. I'm a Muslim. I actually read the Quran when I was 17. It made sense to me. I embraced Islam. I've been reading it for the last 43 years. I read it every month. I go into the commentaries. I look at it. It's a book that I had a very, very intense experience with, and I believe it. And so the things it tells me to do, I actually try to do, and I find that they work. And in terms of like people working 2 jobs, I studied in a place. I lived in a hut and studied in a place where people don't have anything and yet they're happy. Part of the thing is everybody wants so much stuff. They want dunya. They want the world. And what human beings can actually live on and survive on is incredibly minimal. And I've seen this. And I've seen those people that do that. And I find them, the West Africans, I found them some of the healthiest people I've ever been around. And yet they would be considered impoverished people by this society. I mean, one of the problems with Western civilization and modern civilization is that poverty is not a thing that has any nobility. It's all taken away because the culture is depraved. What they watch on television, how they speak, it's depravity. And Islam elevates people. It takes poor people and makes them like kings. And I've seen this, and I've seen those people. They're amazing. I've seen some of the poorest Moroccans that I've ever been with, and yet the dignity, the human dignity, the attachment they have to Allah, the spiritual. I mean, I could take you to people right now that have nothing, and yet they have everything. And I think once you lose sight of that, what is the world about? I think for a lot of people, it's about acquiring more and more. I mean, we are right now on this planet. I mean, one of the reasons why this is happening, people say, oh, why is God doing this to us? Why are we doing it to ourselves? The Quran says, God has given you limits. Don't transgress those limits. God gave you limits on food. If you go out into nature, you don't see fat animals because animals know their limits in eating. The human being has to actually do that. God has given us free will. We can eat to excess, but the Quran says, do not eat or drink to excess. You need about 1,500 calories a day. If you do a lot of work, you need 2,000. Most people are eating 3,000 calories a day, and then they get sick. These are metaphysical laws. Just like you have a physical law in the universe. If I take a hammer and hit you, there is a Newtonian physics that is going to determine the cause and effect of those actions. The same is true in the metaphysical world. People are transgressing the boundaries everywhere. This event has been such a gift for people just to stop and see how insane their lives are.
But for kids, and someone asked this also, there's Muslims now. I'm not even talking about non-Muslims or those who don't believe. Why, they ask, does a merciful God, what's the mercy in this? Like, and they want to know, they're not rebelling. They're like, everything that you said, they said, this has gone us to take stock of our family and we're spending more time with our children. And yeah, we work too hard in this country. And oh, look, we had excess and we have more that we can give. People are also taking stuff. But if you can, and I'm not asking you to speak for God, because no one can speak for God but God. But as a person who has spent so much time, but what's the mercy here? If Allah literally is, like, mercy is attached to his name, how would you tell a Muslim kid experiencing this? I mean, there is also Allah's mercy through this.
Yeah, first of all, if you look at children, and I worked in when I was doing nursing, I had a pediatric rotation. If you look at children, one of the things about children when they get cancer, they're not, why did I get cancer? Why is God doing this to me? They're just in a complete submission. That's part of the nature of children. It's only adults that begin to ask these questions. And then where do the questions come from? Like, why should God be merciful? What's your expectation for God? Who put that in your heart to do that? I mean, those are all value judgments that are coming out of some source. Where did that come from? And then the Quran makes it very clear God is merciful, but he's also muntaqim. He's also an avenger of wrongs. He's also shadid al-iqab. He's fierce in his retribution. So mercy is not the only attribute of God. And if you want to delimit God to mercy as the only attribute. It's the dominant attribute of God. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Katab al-Rahmata ala kulli shay. Allah has prescribed mercy for everything. So there is mercy in everything, but you have to look. If you're going to look with the eye of materialism, then all you're going to see is strife out there. But if you look with a deeper knowledge, then you start seeing there's mercy in everything. I watched my mother for 5 years suffer from cancer. She was in my house. She died, I was holding her hand when she died. I saw her suffering. She was very stoic because that was the generation she grew up in. She never complained. But I watched that, and I found it was amazing the way she grappled and dealt with that. But she also had spiritual training, and she never complained. I never heard her complain about it. And it was a great lesson for me and for my children and the whole family. So I think if you want to make God in your own image, you're going to be in trouble. But if you want to understand God, the best place to go is to read the Quran. And all the answers are there. The Prophet ﷺ said towards the latter days, when everything becomes confusing, go to the book of God. And that's all I'm telling people to do. That I'm doing it myself, and it fulfills me. It has all the answers. But if you deviate from this Quran as a community, I'm talking about the Muslim community, then the Quran says, فَلْيَحْذَرَ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبُهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبُهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Let them be forewarned. If they go against the guidance that I have given you, the Prophet, if they go against your guidance, they will be afflicted with civil strife, with tribulations, with calamities, and a painful chastisement. So you can say, well, that's not very merciful. No, God warned you. And like a father says, don't touch that fire. If you go touch the fire and you get burnt, you say, oh, you're not merciful.
But is this then a sign of Allah's wrath, his displeasure?
First of all, wrath and displeasure, we shouldn't personify God. There's very dangerous things to do. When the Quran talks about wrath, and these are like laws. They're like laws. Like if God said he set up all these laws, and then if you break them, he calls that wrath. So for instance, if you jump off a building, there's a law that when you hit the concrete, you're going to break a lot of bones, if not die. That's a law. So you can say that's the wrath of the concrete, but that's a law. So God has laws. If you transgress those laws, yes, there's going to be painful results or consequences to doing that.
If I can give a perspective, for those of you who know, our daughter endured stage 4 cancer last year. So it was almost a year to the day when we found out that she had stage 4 cancer. She was 2 at the time. Alhamdulillah, she's 3. Stage 4 cancer means that it was all over her liver and it metastasized and went to her lung. And alhamdulillah, as the beneficiary of health insurance through my wife, not through me, but through my wife, and through people's goodwill and generosity and compassion, and a liver donor who was anonymous, who just stepped up, and now he's allowed himself to be known publicly, Sean Zahir. My daughter had a full liver transplant, and alhamdulillah, she's alive, even though she's immunocompromised. I can tell, for those of you who are listening, that the frontline healthcare workers in the United States of America, and the most powerful country on earth, are desperately begging for protective masks. They're begging for resources, for ventilators, just to go out and save fellow Americans, and our government is not doing that. They're really trying, and they're still exposing themselves to the coronavirus and doing godly work, in my opinion, right as we're speaking right now. And here we are, for those of us who are privileged, American Muslims, the ones who aren't from these low-income communities. I think we could safely say that most of the members of Concordia, mashallah, compared to most, are very privileged and lucky individuals. What do you advise Muslims who have privilege during this pandemic? What is the best way that they can emerge as helpers of their fellow countrymen?
Well, I think we have over 30,000 physicians. We have many nurses. We have my son's in an ambulance transporting sick patients every day. So I think Muslims are doing quite a bit as a community in terms of, this is a time to help people that might not be able to afford 2 months of not working, or, there's a lot of people apparently in this country. Most people don't have $400 will pretty much knock them out. So there's a lot of need that's going to be out there. I think Muslims have been doing things like Celebrate Mercy, did all these food packages for people. A lot of the mosques were doing that. In terms of the community, I think there's a lot to do. We're a very generous community. My experience with the Muslim community, and I'm talking about the practicing Muslim community, not the kind of identitarian Muslim community, but the practicing Muslim community is a very generous community that gives a lot of money. They support. The physicians in this country have pretty much built Zaytuna College by and large. I mean, we've had amazing support from the physician community. So, I think Muslims, devout Muslims are doing that. It's important to remember, Ramadan is a time, there's a lot of inwardness, which is very important in Ramadan, but it's also, in our tradition, to do acts that go beyond the self are actually better with Allah than the acts that are limited to the self. So for instance, charity, giving charity is very important. The Prophet ﷺ, the most generous that he was, and he was the most generous of men, was during Ramadan. So there's going to be a lot of need. We have a lot of unemployment. I have people just in Mauritania that, I try to help, and a very small amount goes a long way. And that's one of the interesting things about the Muslim community in the Muslim world, is that small amounts can go really far. Whereas here, it's a much more affluent society, and things are much more expensive.
Specifically, for those who are identitarian Muslim, your words, who are you referring to? How would you describe them? Because some of them might be Concordia members listening right now, and they're like, I've joined on this call, and I have the capacity to do good, even though I'm not as pious as someone else, but I still am identified, as a Muslim.
Yeah, I would say, the baseline of Islam, according to Ahmed ibn Hanbal, is prayer. Like if you don't pray, that according to Ahmed, you're not even a Muslim. The other three imams are a little more generous. They say, if you leave the prayer out of laziness, but not out of a denial of its obligation, then you're still a Muslim. So for me, it's people, I would call an identitarian Muslim somebody who has a Muslim name that comes from a Muslim background, but doesn't really believe in the faith. They don't really believe in the Quran. They don't really believe in the Hadith. They don't have any type. And I think there's increasingly a larger number of those people.
But, there are people, I'm sure, I'm going to make just an assumption there, who identify or fit those traits and who are listening right now. And they will say, I still do identify as a Muslim, and I still have the capacity for goodness. And I would want to work with someone like you, who is somewhat more outwardly religious during this pandemic. Is your hand open to accepting me?
I mean, look, some people have a sentimental connection with Islam because they saw their grandmother or their mother was a very pious person. A good example of that would be like Farid Zakaria, whose father was actually a very devout Shafi'i scholar. Whereas I don't know what his level of commitment to Islam is, but I'm sure he must have some strong sentiments vis-a-vis the religion, just based on the family he came from. This generation that we're in now is a generation that's been cut off from that kind of deep piety that you saw in most Muslim families. I mean, if you take the average Pakistani or Indian Muslim, I guarantee you they had a grandmother that read the Dalail Khairat every day,
I will be the token Pakistani average representative for everyone watching right now.
That was pretty normal for, I don't think people realize how devout the subcontinent Muslims were. And the same is true for Turkey and most of the Arab countries as well. So modern Muslims, it's a different kettle of fish. So
we have Ramadan coming, and some say it's coming on April 23rd, but mashallah, we're a diverse community, or rather I should say communities. I'm sure someone will celebrate it or acknowledge it on another day, but regardless, at least one of the days coming up in the next week, we will begin acknowledging this holy month, the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar. And we're doing it in a situation where most of the world is on lockdown. And for those who are listening who might be observant or less observant, they will know that in addition to the strenuous spiritual practices of fasting, of working on your nafs. It's a very communal practice. It's you're immersed in community daily. How can one Ramadan during coronavirus without a community, and especially if you don't have Zoom?
Well, I think a couple of things to remember. One, there's a strong prophetic tradition of withdrawal. And the Prophet ﷺ said, towards the latter days, cling to your homes and don't go out except for necessity. So, that's one aspect. I mean, traditionally, the Christians the Catholics have what they call the Benedict option. But we also have a tradition of that, of people like Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, who pretty much disengaged from the community, lived on his own in the desert. And many examples of Imam al-Jazuli, the great Moroccan scholar, the same. So there's a great blessing also in not being caught up in the qila wa qala, he said, she said. King Lear, at the end of King Lear, it's a wonderful scene with Cordelia, where he's kind of freed from all the desires of the court. And he said, we don't have to pay attention to who's in and who's out anymore. There's, one of the things in the Catholic tradition, they have something called acedia, which is it's one of the 7 deadly sins, but it's the sin of distractibility. The inability for people just to be alone with themselves. I have never prayed Taraweeh in the mosque, with rare exception, because in the Maliki tradition, which I studied, it's actually better to pray Taraweeh in your home. And the Prophet ﷺ prayed Taraweeh in his home. It's a sunnah of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, and that's why it became a sunnah of the Muslims. But the Prophet actually prayed Taraweeh in his home, and that was Imam Malik's preferred position, one of the 4 canonical imams. So I think praying Taraweeh in your home with your family is a really good opportunity to get close to your family. You can read from the Mus'haf, or you can just do the short surahs. I mean, one of the things that, and I love this about the South Asian community, is that they do the khatam in the masjid. But in Arab countries and in Turkey, there are many mosques where they do very short chapters. And I think that should be an option, because some people can't do those really long standings. So our deen is very easy in that way. The most important thing, and I think it's a great opportunity, the most important thing in fasting is not backbiting, it's not, so there's a great opportunity in being on your own this Ramadan, just to have a much more spiritual Ramadan, instead of, most talk is pretty vacuous and vapid with most people. I mean, that's just the human condition. And the Quran says, those who turn away from empty talk. And there's a great deal of empty talk out there.
I was talking to Imam Majid. We all know Imam Majid from the Adam Center. And he was talking about how he is trying to come up with some creative solutions for his community. He was telling me that in the Adam Center here in Virginia, they usually expect, or we're about to expect, 600 people a night at the mosque. Some of those people are single people. Some of those people are students away from their families. Some of those people, many of them are people who are impoverished, who Ramadan literally is that 1 month where they come and they get food every night, or they get solace. Many of them are elders who are all by themselves, and they get human contact. There are many people on this call right now who are community leaders, community activists, who are tied to their mosque. Is there any, in addition to what you said for the spiritual practices during this interesting, challenging month that we're going to have during lockdown, what would you say is the role for mosque leaders or community activists who are living in non-Muslim countries, where their resources through the masjid or through their Muslim communities can be of benefit to their community, regardless of their religion or ethnicity?
One thing that they can do, and obviously not everybody has access to these type of technologies, but one thing that they can do for the people that do is, I mean, there's many scholars have permitted praying with the technology. So for instance, you could have an imam in the masjid who leads the taraweeh, and then people in their homes follow that taraweeh. If there's a break in the technology, then they would just finish whatever rakat they were in on their own, just like if you lost the sight of the imam, something like that. So I mean, there were many fatwas when they first brought in the microphones about praying far away by the voice of the microphone. The technology then was a lot less than it is today. So obviously technology can break down. But that's one thing that they can do. Another thing I think that's important for the mosque is to know who the elderly people, especially those people that are on their own, because our tradition is a tradition that takes care of elderly people and has great regard and respect for elderly people. Just the fact that somebody has a white beard, the Prophet ﷺ, it's enough to respect them for that, let alone the knowledge that they might have or other aspects. So that I think is really important. I think there's a lot of things that the mosques can do. But the month of Ramadan is a month of getting back to the Quran. It's an important time to remind people about the truths of the Quran. And these truths are eternal truths. They don't change. They don't alter. And there are many metaphysical truths in the Quran that are reiterated over and over again in the Quran so that they might take hold in the human heart. Those are particularly important things to focus on during this time for them.
I remember during crises, and I'll give you an example. It was 9/11. I was 20 years old, a senior at UC Berkeley, and I'm from the Bay Area, and that's where we know each other. I remember there was a flood of people who actually went to church, and one of my high school friends who also went to Berkeley, I saw him going to church. I'm like, where are you all going? He goes, I'm going to church because might as well go now. And he told me, I just need comfort. I remember we did an open Jummah at UC Berkeley a week after 9/11. I was part of the Muslim Student Association. I'm sure many of you guys were. We did not join the Indian Student Association, for better or worse. We went to the Muslim Student Association. I still don't know how to bhangra, but that's okay. We talked to the administration and said, we want to do an open Jummah. And for the first time, they said, great. We did an open Jummah. Over 1,100 people, mostly non-Muslims, came to that open Jummah, where we did everything the way we're supposed to do. We did the khutbah, we prayed, we did a talk before and after. And people in that moment of pain and crisis post 9/11, they just wanted comfort. And it's something interesting where I see that this is where religious communities and specifically religious pastors can shine. Because even atheists and even people who you call identitarian Muslims, they instinctually go to people of faith. They say, you guys have something, those narratives, those stories, those prophetic traditions that can give me some comfort during this time of pain. And the question I have is, what can we do as followers of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as followers of the prophets, to emerge as men and women who can give people comfort during this time, especially during the month of Ramadan?
Well, one way is, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist from Vietnam, he does walking meditation. And he mentions in his book on walking that somebody stopped him in the airport and said, what's your spiritual practice? And he told him I was a Buddhist. He says, why are you asking? He said, you walk so differently. Like that person just stopped him because of something he recognized in the way that man was walking. And I think Muslims, the way they carry themselves, and also not panicking. Pan, let's not forget, is a Greek word for a demon, pan. And so panic is something that comes from Iblis. It's a demonic thing. Muslims I'll give you one example of I was on an airplane with two Mauritanian scholars. One of them was a close teacher of mine. And we were going to a conference. We were actually in first class. And this was years ago. And the plane was in England. And suddenly the pilot came in and said, there's a bomb threat on the plane. We have to disembark. They didn't tell the people in economy that. They told the people in the first class that. As God is my witness, people jumped over the seats and started fighting to get out. These two Mauritanians looked at me and they said, what's going on? And they said, there's a bomb on the plane. And as God is my witness, they both smiled and just said, Subhanallah. And then they just waited till everybody got out. And then they got up and just walked out normally. And that was such a lesson for me about a believer's heart. That people, Colonel Rahim, who was this wonderful Pakistani scholar who wrote Jesus, Prophet of Islam, he was doing his research in the British Museum, and there was a bomb threat, and everybody started running, and he kept writing. And somebody stopped and said that they said, there's a bomb. Aren't you going to run? He said, how do you know you're not running to the bomb? So I really think Muslims we're supposed to be the people of tuma'nina. But the Quran says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'inul qulub." It's through the remembrance of God that the hearts are made tranquil. If you're not connected to God, you're going to panic. If you're connected to God, you're going to, Allah will, in Surah Al-Fath, it says when the Jahili people got all their zeal and hamiyah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anzala sakinatahu. He made his sakina descend upon the hearts of the Sahaba, and they were just calm, relaxed. They went to sleep before Badr. That as a sign from God of their state of tranquility. How do you sleep before a battle? They went to sleep. They had a deep sleep too. They all had to do ghusl. So this is our religion. And this is where, I tell people, an athlete practices every day for the competition. Muslims, our daily practice is for when these events happen. That's when the practice becomes effective. So if you do that practice every single day and just are consistent in your practice, no matter what it is, the baseline is 5 prayers a day. That's the baseline. Hopefully you can do more than that, some Quran in the morning and the evening. But just the 5 prayers a day is amazing. There's an incredible, one of the church fathers, Evagrius, who's one of the desert fathers. He was suffering from the acedia, this distractibility. And so he begged God to this is 5th century, so it's before Islam. He begged God to cure his heart from this. And so God sent an angel, and the angel would pray, and then he would go and work, and then we'd come back and pray, and then he'd go and work. And he said, make your life like this. And that's exactly what Islam is. It's like you take these breaks to reconnect with your Lord, to realign, because everybody's on this horizontal plane. The world, this political world, the world is what it is. But if you're not aligned, we're all going to die. Everybody's going to die. And in the end of the day, all this ill feeling and this ill will, the most amazing thing about people, people when they're about to die, all that stuff is meaningless to them. All those things they were struggling for, fighting for. And I'll just, one last true story. When I was an imam at the MCA, I used to give khutbah on Fridays. And one day this man came to me and he said, I have a friend, he's an Algerian. He's dying of cancer in Stanford and he really loves you and he wants to see you. Could you come? So I said, sure. So we went, and on the way I asked this man, tell me a little about the man. He said, this guy is the most argumentative person I've ever met. And he said, he loves to argue. He gets in fights all the time. So I was, okay, it's a little preparing me for what's to come.
It was fun.
So,
it was going to be fun. It was going to be lively.
I get there and the man was completely green. There's a type of real discoloration that happens when you're end stage cancer. And, I came in and his face lit up and he said, this is one of the happiest days of my life. And I'm so glad. He said, I always wanted to meet you. I used to go to the khutbah and listen. I always wanted to meet you. He said, but I'm glad I didn't. And I said, why? He said, because I think I would have just gotten in an argument with you. And he said, I'm sitting here. I've been thinking a lot about all the conversations I had and how they could have turned out so different from what they ended up turning out to, because I always turned them into arguments. I mean, that's the human condition, So I think people, I'm the age the Prophet ﷺ left the world. Like I'm 63 and I have no ill will towards anybody. I see everybody now, it's just like they're all just doing what God intended them to do. The people that attack me, alhamdulillah, the people that are nice to me, alhamdulillah. It's all, to me, it's just all, I'm just seeing it all and marveling. It's amazing. This whole dunya is just so extraordinary. I've seen it. I get it. It's, I understand what it's about. I really feel like I understand what it's about. And alhamdulillah, the readiness is all, as Shakespeare said. That's all we have to do is prepare for what's coming, because it's coming. And if people think this is tough, the sirat is going to really, really surprise them.
You know, we have 15 minutes left. And I'm going to synthesize people's questions in the last 15 minutes. But I mean, I think you did mention, you're onto something here, that we all have to essentially prepare. We have to prepare to be safe. We have to prepare to be responsible. We have to prepare our finances. But for many of us, with this coronavirus, with the mortality rate at the lowest end being 20 times more fatal than the flu, with the R naught, which is the number that says how much can one person infect another person, it's up to 4, from 2 to 4.
Yeah, the R naught's high. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
But
we're
the
yeah.
mortality rate, the data's not in to determine the mortality rate.
But I'm saying it's not just the flu, right? And we have no vaccine. And the reason why I set it up this way is we've seen it come after young people. We've seen it come after old people. We've seen it come after black and brown people, average Pakistanis, average Indonesians. We've seen it come after elders, and it's preparing us in a way for death also, because we don't know who is going to strike and how it's going to strike. And so I don't want to depress anyone. I really do not. That's not my intention for asking this question. But when it comes to a type of preparedness, you know, none of us is promised a tomorrow, and even kings and pharaohs have fallen. And so we don't know what's going to happen. And so what advice would you give the person listening right now, how to prepare? And again, I say this not to depress anyone, but how do you prepare for death in a moment like this?
Well, two things. One, the Prophet ﷺ said, if you get up in the morning, do not expect to reach the evening. And I had a great gift from Houston Smith, who wrote the famous book, the Religions of Man originally, and then it became the Religions of Humanity, I think.
A beloved scholar who passed away several years ago, but
and a lot of people don't know that he was Muslim. You know, his name was Jamaluddin. He prayed 5 times a day. But and I used to visit him. He had a house here in Berkeley. I visited with my wife, and when I came in, he said, "Your timing is impeccable." and I was like, explain. He said, "This is my last day of life on earth." And I was like, wow, okay. Wow. And so I called the next day. I thought, you know, he probably died, and he didn't. He actually died a few weeks later. But the gift he gave me was, that's exactly how you should live your life. You know, like, this is the last day of my life on earth. And that's what our Prophet ﷺ said. The second thing, the Prophet actually had death meditation, which in Buddhism is the very first practice, because that gets you on the path. But in our tradition, the Prophet said, "Aktharu min dhikri hadam al-ladhat," do much remembrance of the destroyer of pleasure, which is death. And so it's very important to keep death in one's mind, not in a morbid way, but in a way where you appreciate. If you say goodbye to your wife in the morning, or your husband, just know you might not see them again. That's just life on earth. That is the absolute reality of life on earth, that we have no guarantees about anything, even the next heartbeat or breath. And then the second thing is that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man asbaha mu'afan fi badnihi, aminan fi sirbihi, lahu qutu yawmihi, faka'anna mahizat ad-dunya lahu bihadafiriha." Imam Tirmidhi relates this hadith, that whoever, and I learned this outside of Dora in Medina from a great scholar, Muhammad al-Hajjar, a Syrian, who told me that hadith. He said, whoever wakes up in the morning and he's healthy in his body, he's secure in his person, like no threats, and he has enough provision to get him through the day, it's as if he has the whole world that it's been given to him. That's about, and Sahal ibn Abdullah was once asked, it's in the Risal of Imam Qushayri, he was asked, Mata yastarih al-insan, when will the human being be at peace? He said, إِذَا عَرَفَ أَنَّ لَيْسَ لَهُ إِلَّا الْوَقْتَ الَّذِي هُوَ فِيهِ, when he realizes that all he has is the moment that he is in at any given time. And that's the reality of life on earth. These are very simple truths, but they're powerful truths. If they're taken to heart, they can absolutely alter your experience of life on earth.
You know, we talked about death, not from a morbid way, but from an Islamic spiritual perspective. Yet there are many of our fellow Muslim brothers and sisters who are courting death aggressively and recklessly. And it's not unique just to Muslims. We have seen Christian churches right here in the United States of America who will go out of their way, and they have said, we will not follow the quarantine. We will not social distance. You've seen Orthodox Jewish communities, both in here and Israel, go out of their way and say, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to do the Sabbath, and we're going to do our prayers, and we're going to do the weddings. And since you've praised my parents' country, Pakistan, so much, let me humble them real quick. In Pakistan also, we've also seen many clerics who say, Ramadan's coming next year. For the sake of Allah and Islam, we're going to do it in Jamaat. We don't care. We're Muslim. We're going to show our zeal, and we're going to gather in public. What do you say to those Muslims right now who believe that in their religiosity or in their pursuit of religiosity, they have to congregate in Jama'ah to worship?
You know, Bismillah. I mean, I would say a few things about that. You know, in Michigan, they had this rally, you know, give me liberty or give me COVID-19.
Yeah, they're doing it right now, actually. It's happening right now.
You know, America's very libertarian culture, you know, and in 1918, my grandfather actually survived the 1918 flu epidemic. And he told me something very interesting. I think I was about 10. And he told me that he noted that it was all the corpulent people that were succumbing to it. And he noted that all of the pallbearers were thin. And he said that he made a vow to himself that he'd never let his waist get over 32, which he kept, you know. So I think even in 1918, they didn't quarantine people. And I think quarantine is a Islamic tradition. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you hear of a plague in a place, don't go into it. And if you're in that place, don't leave it.
Don't leave it, right.
Yeah, but here's what's interesting. The fuqaha said, and Ibn Hajar and many in commentaries of the hadith, that it's actually permissible to go in if you have certainty in your heart, but you can't leave. So they understood that there's a kind of recognition of certainty. Now, my tradition, we're supposed to obey ulul amri, the people in authority. So this is the Islamic tradition that I come from, is that you obey ulul amri, as long as they don't tell you to do something disobedient to Allah. So, and the Quran says, فَسَلْ بِهِ خَبِيرًا. Ask the experts. فَسَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people who know if you don't know. The experts are the ones that are supposed to determine these type things. Imam Shafi'i's madhab, they actually say that you take two physicians have to testify about whether a disease is makhuf, whether it's a fatal disease or not. So that's part of our tradition. I understand that, where they're coming from. And one wonders down the road how we're going to look at this.
But Shaykh Hamza, can I say this also? We know, I mean, you don't have to be a scholar to know that the base fundamental of our religion in the monotheistic religions is preservation of life, do good, don't do harm. If that's the least that you know. And we know now that there's no vaccine, that the R-naught on this is 2 to 4, that this is spreading. And you mentioned the United States of America, in Wisconsin, where the Supreme Court, for those of you who are paying attention, 5-4 decision, they forced people to go vote in public during a pandemic. Now we've seen a week later, the result of that is that instead of it flattening, coronavirus cases have gone up. So these poor people who literally could not write in their vote by mail had to go, thanks to Republicans and conservatives in the Supreme Court. And as a result of lack of social distancing, people got infected, people get infected, people die. I mean, don't we have also, if you will, a loyalty towards Akhal, number one, following science and facts, but also if I go worship in Jamaat, I am not social distancing. I could be a carrier who could kill people.
Well, I mean, again, look, this is life on earth. People have flu, they have, it's interesting, like social distancing. What about, like, you know, all the STDs and things? They don't tell people to social distance on those. I mean, I don't know. I think
it's not, STD can't be transmitted by, you know, aerosol coughing on someone. You have to actually engage in sexual relations. This is, if I unfortunately touch you, you could get COVID-19 and you could be asymptomatic, but you can pass it on to someone, an elder, like our grandfather, who could die.
I'm at home, okay? I'm not going out. But all I'm saying is I understand the impulse of those people. That's all I'm saying. But I'm doing what I'm told to do. That's my understanding what people should do. But I understand where those people are coming from. You know, the economy is tanking. People are really worried about, you know, people have, especially small businesses, corporations get their, you know, these huge bailouts from the government. But, you know, these small business owners and things like that, they're saying, I'd rather have freedom that's dangerous than security that's, you know, so I just, all I'm saying is I get where they're coming from. If you want me to condemn them and say they're all idiots and they're all stupid.
No. I don't want you.
I don't think that, but like I said, I'm doing what I was told to do. And that's what I think people should do. But if people want to go out there and if they want to congregate in their masjid and things like that, you can't, that's fascism. If you're going to turn everything into what, this is the new world order where we just have to obey Big Brother because Big Brother tells us what to do or what not to do. No, we have to question these things as well. I mean, but like I said, I'm doing what I'm told to do and I'm not encouraging anybody to do that, but I'm not going to diss on people that are really having an incredibly difficult time, people that want to get together. In the end of the day, everything's from God. COVID-19 is from God. Nothing can harm you unless God allows it to harm you. And there's people that have that type of faith that, I mean, I have a wonderful lady from Hyderabad here because we did our event right before they did the quarantine and there were people who said we should cancel it. We didn't. But one lady, I said, are you not going because of the COVID-19? She said, I fear Allah. I don't fear the COVID-19. Now, I understand you can say that's, you know, that's not real. The Prophet said, tie your camel and trust in God, which is true. That's our tradition, the asbab. But I actually appreciate that kind of deep faith that a lot of Muslims, very simple Muslims have. I marvel at it.
So I don't want you to diss anyone. And I appreciate the fact that you can step in their shoes, right? Because people aren't crazy. Their businesses are hurting. They sincerely believe that, you know, they want to join their community. There's lack of information. But also, to quote Spider-Man, who quotes Uncle Ben, who quotes Voltaire, with great power comes great responsibility. And alhamdulillah, you are a sheikh of international renown. And people, whether you like it or not, say, I wonder what Shaykh Hamza is doing. I'm going to ask his opinion. Shaykh Hamza, should I stay home?
I'm staying at home. I feel blessed that I can afford to stay at home. And I don't know, you know, in people in desperate conditions, you know, ضرورات لها أحكامها, like the fuqaha say, you know, necessities have their own rules. And so I really sympathize with people and what they're going through. Like I said, I'm doing what we're told to do. And that's what my teachers taught me. They're doing the same. Sheikh Abdullah bin Bay is in shelter in place in Morocco. He didn't travel on the airplane. In Mauritania, and he's one of the people that provides guidance for that government. They're very strict on this right now. So it's a serious thing. Nobody's gonna deny that. Like I said, the actual communicability of it seems to be very high, but the mortality of it, we don't know yet. And I think it's very dangerous to say it's 10 or 20 times more than the flu. We do not know that. You need a lot of data before you can determine mortality rates. And I think in some ways, I mean, even if it's 99%, which is some people are saying it's, you know, 1% mortality rate, some have said high as 3. But like I said, they think a lot more people have it in New York than actually are recorded as having it, which would reduce significantly the mortality rates. So we don't know. We'll just have to wait. But these are unprecedented times in human history. We have never had this. Even Western War I and Western War II, even those times, you know, people weren't sequestered into their homes unless there were air raid warnings and things like that. No, this has never happened in human history. And so the fact that people are agitated, that's, I think, quite normal and understandable. One would hope. Mhm.
Well, no, I'm sorry. With mindful of time, I think I have a minute left, maybe 90 seconds. And thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for everyone who's joining. I was told there's 400 people listening from all around the world. Thanks for taking time out of your from your Sunday. Just your hope, your dua for the future. How do you hope that Muslims emerge from this pandemic?
I mean, I hope that humanity wakes up to the fact that we have an insane lifestyle on this planet. The amount of pollution. I mean, the air quality. In California, I've seen rain. There's rain clouds outside. I'm looking outside my window. We've had rain consistently since the quarantine started, which is one of the things that the Quran promises, is that if you stop your corruption, if you stop your fasad, Allah will send rain down from the heavens. In the Himalayas now can be seen from 200 miles away in India for the first time in decades.
LA,
So,
we can see the beauty of LA for the first time in years.
exactly. So these are things for us. I think even the animals seem to be very happy. Like we've seen murmurations outside that we've never seen before, the birds doing. The first day of quarantine when I went out, I was driving down and I saw the most incredible double rainbow I've ever seen. I actually, I filmed it to show my wife, but it was just stunning. And I just felt hopeful. You know, I think this is actually, despite the fact that there's tribulation for a lot of people, I think that it's just the blessings in this thing to me are just so amazing. The fact that people want to make sense of it and ask religious traditions to help them make sense of it. All those things, I don't know. I think this is a really amazing thing from God, and I think it's time our species really starts thinking about things. They shut down all these horrible apps, you know, and all of this madness. And then people at home, stuck at home. Pascal said one of the biggest problems in the world is the inability for people to just sit alone with themselves at home. I mean, you can only watch so many Netflix or so many, you know, at a certain point you have to ask some fundamental questions. What am I doing here? Why am I here? What should I be doing while I'm here? You know, these are the fundamental questions that every human being is existentially confronted with, whether they like it or not. But if you don't ask any questions, you won't get any answers.
I would like to thank Concordia for hosting this. I would like to thank Shaykh Hamza for picking up my call 2 hours ago because he thought this was happening on Monday. So I'm very happy.
Yeah.
So it would have been me talking to myself for an hour. So thank you.
Wajahat, you have sorry to interrupt, guys. Wajahat, you have a few more minutes if you want to keep.
Oh, great. And so I would just want to say thank you.
Wajahat, I'm sure you could have a really interesting conversation with yourself.
Yeah, I will do my Shaykh Hamza impression, and I will do Hamza on Hamza, and I will just choose a Netflix series and do the what Netflix? Have you seen a Netflix series? Do you see anything?
I don't know. I try to avoid. I'm not a fan of Netflix for several reasons, which I won't go into. But
don't shatter the ummah yet, Shaykh Hamza. Just give us Netflix at least for the pandemic.
You know, in the only the things that I like tend to be like the Dickens adaptations, things like that. I'm kind of old fashioned.
I would like to say, just to leave it on a set lightly.
Although on a note, I will tell you a true story. Have you watched any silent films?
Yes, of course.
Have you ever seen the Prisoner of Zenda?
I've not seen it, but I know of it.
Okay, it was one of the great classics. Yeah. Have you ever seen Scaramouche?
Nope, same thing. No, haven't seen it. You're digging deep in the well.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I have more knowledge of cinema history than I would like to. But anyway, I was a cinemaphile as a youth, watching a lot of 1920s and 30s films. But Rex Ingram, who is the person, he was considered by von Stroheim, the great German director. Yeah.
Directed Greed, for those of you who are watching.
Greed and M and many other things. But and David Lean, who was the director of some of the great Bridge over River Kwai and
Lawrence
and Great
Dr.
Expectations.
Zhivago.
David Lean considered Rex Ingram to be the greatest director that Hollywood ever produced. Rex Ingram, when he was in the late 20s, he went to Morocco to film a film with Roman Navarro. And Rex Ingram ended up actually being fascinated by the Muslims of Morocco. He learned Arabic and he became a Muslim, and he actually abandoned Hollywood. And he said something stunning. He said that the Muslims solved the economic problem 1400 years ago when the Prophet Muhammad told people they should be content. And he said that when the Great Depression came, he was in Morocco, and he said, it was just an average day in Morocco. Nothing really changed. And I think that's something that is really stunning about the Muslims that really take this religion seriously and live by it, is that they, no matter what circumstances they're confronted with, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We belong to God, and to God we return. We're only here for a very short time. It's a flash in the pan. Many people have been here before us, and I'm sure many will be here after us. And these are our short period of tribulation, and then we move on to a much more a real world. The Quran calls it the hayawan. You know, the afterlife is the real life. So this will be like a dream. And the person who suffered the most in the world, who was a believer, the Prophet ﷺ said, God will ask him, have you ever known suffering? And he said, La wallahi, no, by God, I've never known suffering. And so all of these things that people are going through, these are just very short things. Robert Frost said that the one true thing that he learned, it's only 3 words. And that is that things pass, things will pass. Everything passes, including life on earth. And so I think people should just really relax and try to find God. This is a good time to find God. God is always findable, if I can use that neologism.
And a paraphrase from a famous Frost poem, life, it goes on. And so, inshallah, as we endure this challenge, a significant challenge, some of you who are experiencing it more than others, it's a crisis, but hopefully it could be an opportunity for us to emerge as the better versions of ourselves, for us to emerge closer to our families, for us to emerge closer to our communities, for us to be change agents. And inshallah, after we endure it and we emerge, we can inshallah try to do what we can with our independent superpowers given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Each person, I believe, has some gift to make this world a better place. And this is a moment of reflection as well. I'd like to thank Shaykh Hamza for his time. I'd like to thank Mudassir and Concordia for hosting. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in. And I will take my prerogative as moderator with the last 30 seconds. And if you don't mind, like I said, this is a moment for religious scholars and those who are religious to dig deep with their own superpowers. If you can lead us out with a dua, Shaykh Hamza, I would be very grateful.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Shaykh Hamza. That was a fascinating session. Learned so much, and I know that we have 480 people that joined that session. So alhamdulillah, I know a lot of people benefited from it a lot. Wajahat, thank you so much for stepping, rating, and reminding Shaykh Hamza when the exact timing of the session was. For those of you that are listening, this is a Concordia Forum social distancing Zoom call. We have been running since 10 a.m. UK time, and we have a bunch of programming coming up for you guys now.